Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 6 of season 5 of Star Trek Discovery, called Whistlespeak. And shouldn't it be called Whisperspeak, because that's the way Michael is always speaking? And it's funny how the Whistlespeak itself is only like a few seconds of the actual episode. Like, they show us that those people on that planet, when they're walking in the forest, they're using whistle speak to talk with each other over great distances, but in their daily life they talk normally. So it was literally a few seconds of the episode that actually showed that. So I named the whole episode after that. And this episode almost felt like an actual Star Trek episode. It had all those familiar elements of going down to some actual alien planet with some different culture and the whole Prime Directive thing. It's kind of like tradition at this point that you have to break the Prime Directive in a Star Trek show and there are no consequences to it. And I once made a very long video just on the topic of the Prime Directive, and I said it really should be called the Prime Suggestion, because in the end of the day it's always up to the captain to decide what is best in the situation, and oftentimes they do not follow the Prime Directive, or they bend it or break it completely for the greater good, and the Starfleet apparently is okay with it, so it really should be called the Prime Suggestion. And so I'm not going to hold it against this episode, since every other Star Trek show did exactly the same thing. And also it kind of reminds me of some episodes from Stargate, especially in Stargate Atlantis there were a few episodes about the team going to some planet whose people are living under some ancient technology's protection but don't realize it, and so they develop a religion to explain those things, what is protecting them, and oftentimes it leads to human sacrifice. And the episode's message being against human sacrifice is a good thing. That's one of the things I always loved in Star Trek. So this episode has a lot of these elements which I kind of like. However, it's also full of typical STD stupidity. For example, toward the end of the episode, there's a scene when Tilly is stuck inside a vacuum chamber. They're saying that all the air is being sucked out, and yet we see fire burning on torches in that same room. And the fire doesn't seem to be affected. And the stupidest part is that Tilly herself doesn't try to put out the fire to try to prolong her life. Like, she's being told that all the air is being sucked out of this room. She has minutes to live, and yet she doesn't even try to put that fire out. And even when they're unconscious, that fire is still burning like nothing happened. And so this is a typical Star Trek Discovery kind of stupidity, when the writers don't even know basic common sense daily life kind of information, that fire also needs oxygen to burn, and it's burning the oxygen in the room. But Tilly, who was, in previous seasons, she was always talking about how great science is, she is totally unaware of it apparently. So this is what annoys me most. You don't have to be an astrophysicist to know this kind of stuff, and the writers of Discovery don't seem to know that. As well as no one in the whole production crew. None of the actors, none of the cameramen, the directors, no one mentioned the fact, wait, if in this scene all the air is being sucked out, how come the fire is still burning? Shouldn't Tilly try to put out that fire to prolong her life? No one in the whole production crew realized that, and so this kind of thing takes me out of the show completely, and it really annoys me. And also, as always, they cram in all their messages, like, when they talk about the people on that planet, they make a point to mention how they're all equal, they don't have any status, ranks among themselves. And Michael and Tilly are smiling when they're telling us this, how great that society is because they have no differences between each other. And when we see on the planet all the people, they're calling each other compeers. And at first I didn't even realize what they were saying. Like, it sounded like computers, as if they were calling each other computers. So for a moment I thought maybe their language was influenced by the previous Prime Directive violation, by the ones who set up the technology on the planet, that somehow the name computer became part of their language. So I was thinking about stuff like that when I realized they were actually calling each other compeers. And it kind of reminded me of comrades, how the communists used to call each other comrades all the time. And so when they talk about the people on this planet, how they're all equal, there are no ranks or statuses, and they're all smiling about it, that kind of annoyed me a little bit, especially when they each call each other comrades, compeers all the time. And also they made a point of mentioning how the people on that planet have 3 gender identities. And yet in the whole episode there is no actual mention of that, except in the very end, when that little girl, who across the whole episode they never once mentioned this fact, only in the end of the episode, when Dr. Colbert comes down to help her out because she's suffocating in that vacuum chamber, suddenly everyone calls that girl they, them. And at first it was really confusing because I thought they were talking about her and Tilly who were in that room together, but then specifically they talk only about that girl as if that's they, them. And so how the hell did they even know that when it was not mentioned in the whole episode except in that scene? And also it was Dr. Colbert who was saying that, and he wasn't even on the planet until that moment, so how the hell did he know that when he never previously heard her being mentioned that way? I guess previously her father was shouting, "They're not breathing," but Colbert was not even in the room yet when that happened, and also I thought he was referring to Tilly and her together because they were both in that vacuum chamber. So this is the kind of stupidity I'm talking about. Like, it lacks basic common sense. And also there was a previous scene with Adira who accomplished something on the bridge, and then Captain Render started praising Adira by saying, "I suggested they, them come to the bridge and they will do this and do that," and it took me a few seconds to realize who he's talking about. Like, what group of people is he talking about? Oh, he means Adira. So the way they do it is really annoying, because especially when people from the outside come and they don't realize what you're talking about. Like, there was an episode like that in a previous season when that scientist on that wheelchair came to the ship, and then Stamets started telling him about Adira, but he was using plural. He was saying they, them, and so how is that guy supposed to understand what you're talking about when he doesn't know about Adira? And so you just create confusion, especially in emergency situations when you're calling people to help someone out and you say they, them, and so those people wouldn't know how many people they're supposed to be helping, and so it creates unnecessary confusion. So, it's a science fiction show set in the far future. Why don't they try to invent some new words to solve these kinds of problems, especially, in a universe with multiple aliens, many of whom must have multiple genders and all of that? So wouldn't they have more simple words to solve these kinds of language problems? But no, they just use the language of today. And the way they do it on the show is really kind of forced and artificial. Like, there is no actual reason for it to be in this episode, and it just creates this unnecessary confusion. Like, across the whole episode, that girl is never referred to as a they, them, only in that last scene when Colbert, who never even met her, comes into the room and he suddenly automatically knows to call her they, them. How did he know how to do that? And it just creates unnecessary confusion for the audience. So this is just some of the stupidity of this episode. Also, I like the whole idea of going down to some primitive planet whose people think that their gods did something, and then they find out it's actually technology or some aliens with advanced technology that to them it seemed like magic. And so this is the classic Roddenberry kind of idea. But they kind of try to balance it out in this episode by also having that subplot about Colbert finding religion suddenly, and everyone on the ship that he talks to about it, they're all totally fine with it. And so it's as if the episode is afraid to offend religious people. And so because a big part of the episode is saying to those people on the planet, your religion basically sucks, it's false, you're making human sacrifices for nothing. But oh no, we don't want to offend religious people, so let's balance it out by saying that religion can be a good thing. And so Dr. Colbert found religion, and everyone are totally okay with that, and everyone tell him, "Oh, that's wonderful." And also on the planet, in the end, Michael tells that priest, after he found out it's all technology by aliens, she has to tell him, "Oh, but it doesn't mean gods don't exist. It just means you did all these human sacrifices for nothing for centuries, but your gods can still exist, you just were praying wrong." And so it's like the episode is too afraid to offend people, like they're trying to balance everything out. And another ridiculous moment was when Tilly is the one to win that marathon on the planet. They don't yet know at that point of the episode that the marathon, whoever wins it, will get to go and meet the gods, quote, but they don't realize that will mean human sacrifice. And so Tilly is trying to win that marathon race to get into that tower, and then she is the winner of the race. Michael didn't win, not because she couldn't, because she's so awesome, but simply because she had to go and follow some other trail of clues, and that's why she left Tilly to win the race. And it would have been clever if they cheated somehow, if she took something to help her out, because the stakes are so high, they have to complete this mission at all costs, remember the red directive. So if they showed some scene that Tilly took some kind of hyper spray to help herself out, then I would be totally okay with that. But they didn't. They just showed that Tilly is so awesome, she can win a marathon. And at least it does tie back to the first and second season of the show, in which they did often show that Tilly was training by running marathons and all of it. And it was a little bit ridiculous back then as well. But ever since then, she gained a little bit of weight since then, so it kind of makes it a little bit ridiculous when she's running among much fitter looking people and somehow she is the one to win. Maybe all the other ones didn't actually want to win because they knew that will lead to human sacrifice, and so they didn't actually want to get to the end. But she didn't know that, and that's why she did. I guess I can come up with excuses, but the episode itself never does. And so that is kind of ridiculous. And it almost feels as if they're doing it deliberately at this point. Like they want us to complain about it so that they can say, oh, you're just wanting to fat shame people. You don't like fat people winning the race. But we are so body positive, we're going to show a fat woman winning a marathon over all the others because fat people can be awesome and all of that. They should have just explained it by showing that, when they were handed those sugar cubes and didn't know what they are, at that point of the episode, they also had retinal tricorders in their eye because they cannot be seen using actual tricorders among these primitive people. So they installed something in their eye which is like a tricorder that they can use automatically with their eye. So they could have simply shown that she scans that cube and she knows not to take it, and so she fakes taking it, and that's how she can win the race or whatever, because that cube makes you very thirsty, and that's why all the other people quit the race because they're too tempted to drink the water which is all over the place around them. And so she's the only one who is able to resist that temptation. So simply show that she scanned it and then faked taking it. She didn't actually swallow that cube, and then I can buy the fact that she's the only one who won that race. And also, why didn't they scan those cubes before they ate them? They are on an alien planet. How would they know it's not poisonous to them to take that cube? And they do have the retinal tricorders at that point, and yet they never use it in that scene, which would be very useful. And about the whole retinal tricorder thing, I think it's a little bit of a problem now because in every future episode set after this time point in the Star Trek universe, I will always now ask, why don't you always have this kind of retinal tricorder with you? I mean, it is very comfortable to use, so why don't you always use it? And if they keep adding this new technology, at some point they will no longer have to carry any equipment. Like they now have holographic badges and automatic tricorders in their eyes, and so they can go to missions totally naked now without any equipment because they have all this advanced technology. And so at some point they will become almost like a Q entity. Like they don't have to have any technology equipment with them, they can just do everything as if by magic, and so it will make them kind of overpowered, and that's kind of bad for a Star Trek TV show when your characters are just overpowered with so much technology in their very body, and we wouldn't have any toys to look at and play with and all of that because it's all just in their brains and in their eyes and in their body now. And the effect itself is kind of cool, and it kind of reminded me of a scene in the old movie Supernova when someone had, one eye of a different color. So that's kind of cool in a way, but it's funny how they didn't use it in that one scene that it could have been very useful for. Before eating that cube that makes you thirsty, they didn't bother to scan it. There are also many things in this episode that don't make sense in the context of the rest of the season. For example, when Colbert was inhabited by that real guy from the past, one of those scientists who hid the clues in the first place, he specifically said that they erased their existence from any database, meaning no one would know who those scientists were who hid the clues. And yet in this episode, without knowing the identity of the scientist who hid the next clue, they would have literally no way to find the location of the next clue. And so they had to get that information from Cronenberg in that white room. He somehow painstakingly got the list of those scientists. He gives it to her on a piece of paper, presumably so that no one can possibly hack it from the outside. So he writes those names on a piece of paper and she reads it while they're inside the Infinity Room. And so obviously it was very hard to get those names, and the identity of the Denobulan scientist who hid the next clue is absolutely vital in this episode to be able to find the next clue. So that makes me wonder, how the hell did Shin Hoti and Skrull manage to get that information in that other timeline in which Discovery was stuck in time, and Shin Hoti somehow found the progenitor technology. So how was that possible in that other timeline? It almost makes me wish we could have seen somehow that other timeline in which Shin Hoti and Skrull were the ones who found all those clues, which makes no sense now because, first of all, 2 of those clues were already on the Discovery, and the Discovery was stuck in time. So how did they get those clues out of Discovery, and how did they get all these next clues if it's so hard to get them? I mean, they just barely managed to do it in every episode, and here they have to get that list of scientists from Cronenberg in the Infinity Room, because without it they would not be able to figure out where to go next. So how did Shin Hoti get it in the other timeline? So this is what I mean, that nothing makes any sense if you actually think about it in this show. And Cronenberg keeps mentioning how much he loves ancient technology. That's why he wears glasses. That's why he writes on a piece of paper, which he says it's actually real paper from the past and stuff like that. And we still don't even know who the hell this guy is, what is his position exactly. Somehow he knows more than anyone else in the Federation. So is he a time traveler? Is he a future guy from Enterprise? I mean, who exactly is this guy? They never actually explain it, and yet somehow all of Starfleet and the Federation always trusts him and takes his commands. It will be interesting if he will be revealed to be the villain. Maybe he's kind of Section 31 or something like that. Maybe in that other timeline he was helping out Shin Hoti get all the other clues, even though it led to the destruction of the Federation. But maybe he's an evil guy who wants it for himself for some reason. I guess it's possible, so I will refrain final judgment on the season until we actually get to the end of it, but it's kind of obvious that nothing actually makes any sense if we actually think about it. And the clue they're trying to figure out in this episode is that vial of water they found in the previous one, and they keep analyzing it, finding nothing. It's simply distilled water. And it has a few scratches on the side, which they don't even think that maybe it's deliberate, maybe it's a symbol. Only in the end of the episode they realize that, I guess, that it's not some random damage, but that is actually part of the clue. And they've been analyzing this vial for days, and at no point did they think maybe those scratches is actually some kind of symbol. And only when they get the list of those scientists, they know that one of them is a Denobulan who was an expert in weather modification. And it kind of annoyed me how they mentioned that the Denobulans use the silver iodide to make it rain on their planet. And that is the same way we see clouds here now, today. So that kind of annoyed me as well, because we are talking about an alien species centuries in the future, and they're using the same technology we use nowadays, and so that was kind of stupid. And so they figure out that the vial of water is simply a clue to go to a planet on which that Denobulan scientist once set up some kind of weather modification system to help save the people on that planet, which I guess would have died otherwise. And she hid it inside mountains so that those people will never find out it's actually technology that is making it rain. And yet, apparently in this episode we see that people do enter that tower and they sacrifice people inside of it because they think the sacrifice is what makes it rain. So they found all the machinery inside of it. So apparently it was very badly hidden by that scientist lady. And how does one scientist do something so big? Like, wouldn't it take numerous people and whole starships to set up something so big? And yet apparently only one scientist somehow knew about it. So anyway, Michael and Tilly go down undercover to that planet, and they specifically mention the Prime Directive that they are not allowed to break. And of course, in the end of the episode, they do break it completely, and I'm guessing there will be no consequences whatsoever. I guess we can excuse it by saying maybe it's because it's a red directive that allows them to break the Prime Directive. Just like in Voyager, they said the Omega Directive is higher than the Prime Directive, and so that allows them to break the Prime Directive with no consequences. So maybe the same is with the Red Directive. Or maybe because, if they hadn't revealed the truth to those people, then all of them would have died pretty soon, because that last weather tower was breaking down and wasn't working. So if they hadn't told them the truth and told them how to fix the tower, then they would all die. And so what can be worse than that? And so I think logically, in that kind of situation, it would make sense to break the Prime Directive to save all of them. Otherwise, what can possibly be worse? And also, the way they showed it, that the people on this planet knew about the machinery inside those towers, and so that's why they started sacrificing people inside of that room, in which all oxygen has been sucked out, and yet the fire is somehow burning. So that means the initial interference was directly responsible for the religion forming, and so we can excuse it by saying maybe that the Nobulan scientist was not part of the Federation, so they had no Prime Directive yet, and so since these people lived like this for centuries, maybe it's okay to interfere in this case to help fix that initial interference. And so I can come up with excuses, but I'm sure the show itself will never bother to actually discuss this topic. They will just show that there are no consequences for Michael breaking the Prime Directive. And also they show that there is like a small control panel outside of the tower hidden in some rock, and Michael just easily found it, granted with her eye tricorder, but still she can just touch that stone and it opens up to reveal the control panel. Isn't that kind of strange that no one found it in 800 years? No one ever stumbled or touched that stone, which is pretty nearby to that place where they were doing the marathon. And yet none of those people on that planet in centuries ever found or accidentally touched that stone to reveal that control panel. I mean, it's pretty easy to open. You just press on it and it opens up. So maybe they should have shown that Michael actually uses some kind of technology to open it up. Then I can say no one else opened it because they couldn't have accidentally stumbled upon it. But the way everything is done in this episode, it feels kind of cheap and lazy. Also, these are aliens, and yet they all look totally human, only with some veins on their forehead or something. So that's kind of the cheapest way to make aliens without even any prosthetics. Just paint something on their forehead and they're alien, and that's it. And so Tilly and Michael pretend as if they're from some other village in the east, and no one ever suspects them of anything, even though they don't seem to know anything about the main religion of this place. And so it was kind of ridiculous how no one's even suspected them, even though they don't know anything about the main religion of this whole planet. And also we see from space that most of the planet is uninhabitable, only a small area is, and so that makes it even less likely that Michael and Tilly, pretending to be from some other distant village, and wouldn't know anything about the main religion of the place. I did like that one woman who said that she was cleaning the dust of plants or something outside of the protection field. For some reason they send out people to clean dust in the dusty areas. Why exactly is not clear, and so I kind of liked her because she kind of reminded me of the Macklans from the Orville, the way she talked, and she was kind of being very nice. And for some reason I kind of really liked her, and she's kind of suffocating because she took too much dust to her lungs while she was outside the forest for some reason. And then Michael tries to heal her, and then Tilly says, oh, we cannot do that because that will violate the Prime Directive. And luckily the priest of that place shows up, and he uses some kind of, I guess, magnets to make some kind of vibration, which cures that woman somehow. And then the daughter of that priest is the one that will, only in the end of the episode, they will reveal that it's they, them. But no one in the episode ever called her that until the very end, which made it ridiculous how Colbert knew to refer to her as that way, when across the whole episode no one ever mentioned that even. And she's the one who tells them that the only way to get into that tower is if they win that marathon, and then they'll be allowed to go there to talk with the gods. And so Michael immediately says that she wants to go on that marathon with Tilly, and then Michael finds some mutated mushrooms or something, and then she says, oh, mutated mushrooms which are a different color, that means the control panel must be nearby, so I'll go and look for it, and you, Tilly, go and complete the marathon. And it's funny how even before that they show that Michael is getting tired faster than Tilly does. Michael has to stop for a moment, and Tilly kind of runs circles around it as Michael is resting. So that was absolutely ridiculous. And then Michael goes off to look for that control panel, which he eventually finds in a rock, which is easy to open, and Tilly manages to win that marathon, and she helps that non-binary girl to win with her, even though they never previously said if there can be more than one winner. And so isn't that a risk that Tilly is taking, not winning herself but taking that girl with her to win? How did she know that they will both be allowed to go into that temple? And so only when they are inside that mountain in that temple, the priest reveals that they will be sacrificed, and only then Tilly is like, wait, what? So that was kind of funny, even though it should have been obvious, and it's strange how they never bothered to learn more details about all of it before they volunteered to go on this pilgrimage. And then on some wall inside the temple, she sees the symbols that one of them was on that vial, and then she realizes the vial actually leads to some other tower which was not functioning anymore, I guess. So why didn't they go to those other towers first to study them? Why did they immediately go to that one tower which remained active? Why did they assume that must be the only one that will lead to the next clue? So if they knew all of it from space, I mean, they did scan the planet from space, right? So why didn't they first investigate the other towers before going to the habitable area with the people and risking the Prime Directive, if they could technically avoid all of it by simply going to study the other towers first and find the clue there, as they eventually did in the end of the episode anyway? It's also funny, when they showed it all from space, we see that the area which is habitable is kind of in a hexagon shape. And they said something about the tower also generating a force field which is protecting that area from the dust storms. And that is kind of funny to me, because remember what I said, how I noticed in all the new Star Trek shows, all the force fields are always in the hexagon shape. And so the same exact thing here, even though it's a huge force field covering a chunk of the planet, it's still in the form of a huge hexagon for some reason. And it also reminds me of the previous episode when they were trying to widen that wormhole in the previous episode. Adira said something about firing torpedoes in a sequence that will create a hexagon shape around that wormhole, and Raynor asked, why a hexagon shape? And then Stamets just cut him off and said, because that will work, and that's it. We don't have an explanation. So that was as if the show itself was admitting its own obsession with the hexagon shape, because whenever we see any kind of force field by any kind of alien, in any time period, in all the new Star Trek shows, it's always made from hexagons. And so the same thing here, with that whole area of the planet which is protected, it's all one huge hexagon. So it's almost as if it's some kind of running inside joke at this point. So anyway, Tilly and the non-binary girl are stuck in the vacuum chamber, and all air is being sucked out, and somehow all the torches remain lit, and Tilly never even thinks about maybe covering up all those fires to help preserve the oxygen for a little bit longer. And then they cannot beam her out because the walls are made from titanium. And then Michael asks that the ship beams her in as close as possible. And then she appears right in front of that priest, and then has to tell him everything so that he will open the door, because only he can open it. And I keep thinking, why don't you just use a phaser to cut a hole in the wall? I guess titanium maybe is resistant to phaser fire as well, but still it's kind of silly how she never even tries. It would have been a cool scene if she actually tries to burn a hole through the wall, and maybe that is why that guy will think she's a god, that she will not just see her beaming in, but also using phasers and energy beams and her glowing eye retinal tricorder and all that kind of stuff. But all he ever saw was just her beaming in, and that was enough that he is totally kind of amazed by that. But he still wouldn't believe her when she tells him all the truth, and at one point he asks her, are you a god? And so shouldn't she simply say yes so that he will open the door to save those guys, and only later she can tell him the truth? Isn't it more important to save lives at this point than trying to convince him of this very long backstory to allow him to open the door? Why don't you first make him open the door somehow and only later talk with him? Or simply erase his memory. You do have advanced technology now. They could even do that kind of thing in the 21st century. Simply erase his memory later, as not to violate the Prime Directive. And maybe take that girl to your ship. Maybe she can become Adira's next girlfriend or something. So you could have easily solved the Prime Directive issue by simply erasing his memory later, and yet no one even suggested that. I guess they no longer have that kind of technology. So instead they have to tell him everything, that they are aliens, that this is alien technology that is making it rain, that all their human sacrifices were for nothing, that the religion is basically stupid. Oh wait, no, Michael says, no, it doesn't mean your religion is wrong, even though you have been sacrificing people in the name of your religion for hundreds of years, but maybe your religion is not so bad after all, maybe there are gods after all. And that's something that kind of annoyed me in this episode, that they try to balance things out as not to offend religion too much. And also they had that subplot on the ship when Colbert is having some kind of spiritual crisis after he had another man inside of him, which made him feel connected to something higher than himself, and so he's constantly talking with everyone about it. And they never go into the actual details. Like, they keep saying, something is wrong with me, something is off about me. He's talking with a hologram of his Albolita, which he himself created and programmed, and she's not helping him. So he tries to do medical exams on himself, and it's all normal. And then he talks with his husband and tells him, I'm having a spiritual crisis or something. So that whole subplot was kind of terrible, not because I'm against this whole idea, but the dialogue just wasn't interesting. Like, they never actually went into the details. Like, what exactly are you talking about? What exactly are you feeling? They never go into the actual details of any of it. Like, what exactly is he talking about? Which religion is he talking about? What is he feeling connected to? Like, they never mention any of the details. So it's all kind of almost feels like pandering. It's all kind of style over substance. Oh, we have to show that religion is fine in the future, but they don't want to say which religion. And at the same time, the main plot of the episode is about how religion can lead to human sacrifice and people worshipping false gods, and they're worshipping this building which they know is causing rain, but they only think it happens if they sacrifice someone in it. Which is kind of strange. Like, how come no one ever tried to activate that room without anyone in it to see if there will be the same effect or not? Like, they always sacrifice people in that room, and never once someone suggested maybe we should try it without someone inside of it to see if it will still make it rain or not. So it's kind of ridiculous, and it could have been written a little bit more cleverly, and then it would have been okay. I kind of enjoy those aspects of that episode which are similar to the old Star Trek shows about those kinds of things, but the way they did it, the details of it don't make any sense, and that's why it's kind of annoying. So in the end, they say that they will teach that priest how to fix that tower whenever it's broken down again. And so I wonder what they would have done if not for the need to save Tilly in the last moment, and if Michael wasn't forced to break the Prime Directive. What would they have done then? Would they have simply left that planet and left those people to die, or would they somehow let them know of the truth somehow, or will they go and fix those other towers on the planet to make the other areas habitable or not? And so I am curious to see what they would have done in that situation. And that kind of thing would have been interesting if they had an actual moral dilemma, if we had a scene of people just sitting around the table discussing the situation and what is best to do morally wise and ethically and all of that. If they had an actual moral dilemma and an actual ethical discussion, that would have been way more interesting than Michael just randomly deciding, oh, I have to save Tilly, so I'm going to break the Prime Directive, and by the way, you can now fix the tower whenever you want, and you don't have to sacrifice people anymore, and so goodbye, that's it. So there was no actual dilemma, that because of the time constraints, because of the way it was all kind of on the run, and so there was no moment to actually ponder some kind of dilemma, some kind of intellectual question and decision to make. And so that's what makes it much worse than all those older episodes in TNG and the other shows in which you actually had a moment to stop and think about the situation. Here it all just happens as if randomly, and even though it is similar, it has some of the same elements, but it's all done in a much more sloppy way. And that's why it's not nearly as good in the end of the day. So this show never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Remember how in the previous episode they found the Mirror Universe Enterprise, and yet they didn't do anything with it. So okay, they found the evil Enterprise, but there was no one on board. So what was the point of all of that then? You could have played with that so much more. You could have revealed maybe there was someone still alive on that ship, maybe someone from the original crew. Wouldn't it be awesome if they found the evil Mirror Kirk, who was somehow still on that ship? Maybe he froze himself in cryogenic sleep, or they found him in the transporter buffer. Maybe he lived alone on that ship for 50 years, which would explain why he looks like today's Shatner, because he lived on that ship alone for decades while it was stuck in that strange area of space, and at some point he figured out a way to preserve himself in the transporter, and then when they came on board it got activated, and then evil Shatner shows up on that ship and he becomes the villain of that episode at least, or maybe several episodes. Wouldn't that have been awesome? And if they couldn't get Shatner, they could have got some other actor from the original series who is still alive and showed the evil mirror version of that character. That could have been awesome, and yet they never bothered to do that. They just showed the ship itself. Oh, it's the evil Mirror Enterprise, and that's it, and didn't do anything with it. So isn't that a missed opportunity? And I actually did a short fan edit of that idea on my other channel, so I will link it in the end for you to check it out. Let me know what you think. I will definitely do a lot more edits like that to show all the missed opportunities. Like a lot of times in the show, they seem to be setting up something interesting, but then fail to actually deliver, fail to do something interesting. It all just ends up being filler and just a whole bunch of wasted opportunities. So that's all I had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it all in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.